I've been a drag queen and a stand-up performer for years, so I might walk about. It's kind of like my comfort zone. I'm also ADHD. It's nice to move around, flap my arms a little bit, that kind of thing. So does it bother anybody if I do move around as much as that? Okay. I probably won't, because I've got stuff to say and it's just distracting if I do a lot of that. And I might make the speakers feedback and all sorts of things, so I'll try and stay fairly still. I am Jenn Wilson, Jenn with a double N. Jenn. So that's how you can distinguish, one of the many ways you can distinguish between me and the other Jenn who was just talking now, who is amazing and I've never met, and she's just wow. My pronouns are they, them. I am very, very tall, over 6'1", and I'm wearing platform trainers. Female person, genderqueer, wearing mostly black clothes, very stripy socks, and my hair is yellow, orange and pink. And I'm looking at my phone because it will remind me about the things I want to tell you about today. So I'm a performing artist and an activist, although I don't really necessarily like that word. And I work also as a kind of coach and facilitator and a training person. And I do a lot of thinking and I do a lot of writing. And one of the things that I did was I founded the International Day of Consent. It's the 30th of November every year. Started in 2018, and I'm going to keep on marking it until the UN take it off my hands. Consent. I'm increasingly not leading with the word consent when I talk about this work, because usually when I go, I do this stuff about consent, my work's about consent, people go, she's talking about sex. I'm not. I mean, that's one area that's it's quite important you get your consent as right as you possibly can, because there's a lot of risk of harm. Or they think, oh, great, she's going to talk about flipping, data compliance, GDPR, tick boxes, have you ticked the box to consent to the cookies? I'm not really interested in that kind of consent. It's kind of a necessary evil, that we have a line that you can cross, and a law that you can break, and some boundaries. But for me, consent is not this simple tick box binary thing. The problem with that model is that it sets up this binary, you can be right or wrong, yes or no, a line you can cross, and it makes it overly simple. And Betty Martin, who is worth looking up if you're interested particularly in embodied consent. She does a whole load of interesting stuff called the Wheel of Consent, with games that you can play that are about who's giving, who's taking, who's doing, who's receiving. It's a really interesting process, which would take me, like an hour to talk about, so I'm just mentioning it. She talks about consent not being the gatekeeper model. That's what we talk about. This sort of simplistic version of consent is a gatekeeper model where somebody wants something from someone else, says, can I have it? And they say yes or no. And then if they say yes, on we go, and it's done. And that's extremely dangerous because consent isn't a thing that you can get once, tick a box and go, yes, I've done it, thank you, right now I can do whatever I like. Consent is an ongoing practice. And for me, it's the process by which we navigate this space of connection. There's been lots of talk today about connection and the importance of that. And I think for me, consent is the process of how we connect and relate to each other and to some extent to ourselves as well. So in the conventional model of consent, we're talking generally about interpersonal consent. Sex, for example, is generally a sort of one-on-one kind of thing. Sometimes there's more people involved. You can do it on your own. There are variables, but generally speaking, we're talking about two people, and that's what we're talking about. But I see consent as operating on roughly 4 different levels. It's not that simple, but they're useful ones to think about. One is that interpersonal level. But underneath that is your own permission. We were just talking about that with the other Jenn. I missed a bit because I went out to the loo. But yeah, the permission you give yourself, the permission you feel you have in any situation. Like I just took for myself when I came onto this stage, I'm going to call it a stage, the permission to say, can I have a microphone that means I can walk about, and I can walk about. And then I sort of checked with you. I gave myself the permission first. Said it's okay to not be a conventional standing in front of a microphone speaking and presenting at slides kind of a person today. But a lot of the time we don't. A lot of the time we go, right, this is the rules of this situation, so I'd better just do what's expected of me. I know that someone of my gender, my age, my social position, my role in this particular situation means that I'm supposed to behave in a particular way, and I can't possibly deviate from that. I don't give myself permission. I don't even ask the question if there's another way of doing it. So there's that, self-consent. I'll say a bit more about it maybe in a minute if there's time. And then there's the interpersonal, then there's group consent. And, you know, obviously the work that Sandrine's talking about, you get a bunch of dancers and choreographers and people like me and people who've got different abilities in a space, and that's a group dynamic. Most of us are quite used to inhabiting different group dynamics and shifting the rules without even really thinking about it. So, for example, well, I'm a parent. How I'd behave as a parent at the school gates would be very different from how I'd behave in this room here today, would be very different from how I'd behave at a family wedding, would be very different from how I'd behave if I was out in a nightclub with my mates and I'd had a few drinks. We're used to these kinds of like navigating different groups and their different expectations of us. But sometimes those rules are really explicit, and Sandrine does quite a lot as part of the process with Unbound of going, let's talk about what's okay, let's talk about what isn't okay, let's talk about where the boundaries are, let's talk about what is going to make everybody feel as safe as they possibly can be in this space, and there's a lot of discussion. A lot of times we'll walk into a room like that and very little of that will happen. There's just a sort of assumption that everybody knows what the conventions are of a rehearsal room or a workshop space or being in an audience at a theatre or whatever. And then the fourth layer of the concentric circles of consent is what I call them when I'm being grand about it. The fourth one is the systemic, the social, the cultural. And we live in systems that are not very consensual. Britain is very hierarchical. We have still the vestiges of quite a strong class system, race, ethnicity, gender, ability, disability, neurodivergence, all of those different things, height, body shape, a whole bunch of things that make us make assumptions about who has power over somebody else. And systemically, we have white supremacy, we have patriarchy, we have capitalism. These are all quite hierarchical structures, quite coercive structures that we are immersed in from the minute we're born. And someone says it's a girl or it's a boy, for example. We are suddenly defined, and that's our role in a system before we've even done anything. And so our ability then, back at the level of self, the permission that we give ourselves, is informed by all those other layers. The ways we behave in groups is informed by all those other layers. And so this notion that we are actually completely free ever to really make a free decision entirely, maybe not completely. However, 99.9% of us have some agency. Even small children have, or even animals have some agency. If you're a sentient being, you have some agency, some choice, some ability to choose whether or not you will cooperate, whether or not you will obey, whether or not you will enthusiastically join in, whether or not you will seize the microphone and march across the stage. So you have agency, we all have agency. And that is the thing that we're navigating our consent with. So I talk about consent as this thing we navigate. It's a practice we navigate, finding connection with one another, finding connection with ourselves. And so the model that I use is the consent compass. I don't know if we've got a slide of it, have we? We have, awesome. But I will describe it, because obviously that's, that's important. Well, it's kind of a bit oval to me, but never mind, that's all right. And it's not normally these colours, but never mind. So this is my model of the consent compass. And the direction of travel is always towards connection. When we're looking for consent, when we're trying to behave consensually with each other, we're always moving towards connection, towards consensus, towards finding a way forward where everybody is comfortable to move forward together. So whoever we're interacting with, whoever we're connecting with, it's, are we comfortable to move forward together? Yes, we are, and then we will. And if somebody's not comfortable to move forward, then we don't have their consent. And that does go right back to the self as well, and to noticing, actually thinking consciously, do I want to do this? Am I willing to do this right now? In sex education, people talk about enthusiastic consent, and it's great, enthusiastic consent, in the context of educating teenagers that sex should be fun. Great. But I do not feel enthusiastic about going to the dentist. Not ever. But I still have an active agency. Yes, go ahead and drill my teeth. Go ahead and give me an injection. It's horrible. I don't want you to, but I'm willing to, because it will make my teeth healthy, and it will stop me having toothache or whatever else. So it's that moving forward together. Your agency is the bit of you in the middle, your capacity to consent, you making the decision. And the outer ring of your compass is accountability. So it's really important, when we move away from this checklist version of consent, to recognise that we're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong a lot, all the time. Hopefully, we're not going to get it wrong in a situation where somebody's going to get seriously harmed. That's where the compass comes in as a useful framework to help us check in with. But we're going to get it wrong, and the point of accountability is that we learn through getting it wrong. We go, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try going over here. Nobody's got a problem with that. Is it all right if I move another 2 steps? It's all right with Helen. Is it all right with anyone else? Right, see, now I can see that there's a consensus there. Most of you are going, yep, that's okay. So there's a little, it's throwaway practice, but if I just went over there and I could see somebody in the audience going, oh God, this is making my vision struggle, or I'm getting distracted or disengaged, then I might go, maybe I should stay still, and I'm like, so I've made a mistake, I haven't checked with someone, I've just behaved away, and I might have upset them, but I'm learning from that mistake, I'm learning from that process. And you can only ever learn by trying stuff and making mistakes, but you want those mistakes to be accountable ones. Now, there's a bit of a problem generally in our in a lot of situations, and certainly in a lot of dance situations, where the agency and the accountability are out of balance. There are some people who have a lot of agency and who are not necessarily willing to take the amount of accountability that goes with it. Yeah? And the accountability and the blame and the pain and all the shit, excuse the French, is landing on the people who have limited agency. We're not in consent there, but that's the dynamic that's going on. Okay, that's enough about that for the minute. Then you have your 4 points on the compass, and they are context, communication, curiosity, and change. And like any time you're navigating anything, you kind of need to know where you are in relation to all of them. But as I said, this is not a checklist model. If anyone tells you they're a consent expert and they can go, here's the way to get consent right, tick all these boxes and you've done it perfectly, no, just no. This is a framework to guide you. So the points on the compass are useful things to bear in mind when you're navigating towards that connection, when you're trying to use your agency and your accountability to stay in consent, in consensus. Context. That is the limits, the specifics, the boundaries and the edges of your agreement. So you've all agreed to sit here this afternoon in this room that's getting increasingly quite hot, actually, and to listen to me talking about this and to the various other speakers that have been here. That doesn't mean that anyone's going to expect you to turn up here every Friday at 3 o'clock and sit and listen to people talking to you. It's specific to today. It's specific to the agreement in this room with this group of people. This video's happening, these permissions, these agreements as a group of people. And the boundaries are really helpful because then we know the edges of this, we know the limits of this, we know what we're in, and we know when we're not in it anymore. Communication, fairly straightforward, but then again not. Obviously you need to communicate, as I did just then with that example where I said, can I walk over here? I got Helen verbally said, yes. Helen was clearly communicating that yes, it was all right for me to do this, but I hadn't got anyone else's explicit communication to move. And so I waited and said, is that okay? And waited until I'd seen maybe 90% of the people in front of me nodding their heads or going, yeah, or giving me energy that said, yes, that's fine. So making it explicit, making the communication explicit can be quite tricky, especially when we're dealing with different disabilities, different cultural backgrounds, different ages, different assumptions about what's going on here, and our own limits on ourselves about what we're comfortable saying yes or no to, whether we're able to speak up in that moment and say, hang on a minute, I'm not sure. So communication. Curiosity is the next one. Informed consent, if you like. The thing about informed consent is you don't know what you don't know until you suddenly find you don't know it. So I could say to you, shall we all have a pizza? And you might go, yeah, pizza, great. And then I tell you that I'm going to put pineapple and olives on the pizza, and you're like, I'm not so sure now. It's a bit weird. So, you're then like, well, what are you, so the curiosity is, well, what do you mean a pizza? What sort of pizza? Where from? How big a pizza? Who are we sharing it with? Are you going to put what? Well, pineapple and olives, that's a weird combination. Can you put the pineapple on one side and the olives on the other? Do you see what I mean? It's that getting into the curiosity about what the other people that you're navigating consent with want and know and understand about what's going on, and being curious about your own information. I think I know what a pizza is, but maybe I don't. Okay, and the last point on the compass is change. And that is that fundamental point that we are constantly in a changing landscape. And I can see now that some of you are getting tired and some of you are getting hot, and your consent to listen to me talking about this and walking about the stage with my microphone is wearing a bit thin. So the circumstances constantly change, and our consent changes with it. Again, going back to sex for a minute, I talked to a sex educator who said that some teenage lad she was doing consent education with said, oh no, we couldn't stop. No, there's a point of no return, we couldn't stop. And she said, what if your gran walked in? And they went, oh, I'd stop then. So change, we kind of got to be ready for navigating the change when it comes along. So that's the model, that's the consent compass that hopefully you can kind of imagine if you can't see it. Your agency at the middle, your accountability holding that in place, moving towards connection, and navigating with context, communication, curiosity, and change in mind. Just before I kind of finish up talking at you, I want to just make some specifics around dance quickly. So, Sandrine, I hope it's all right to say this. God, I'm going to... it probably is. You teach in ballet schools sometimes, right? And in ballet schools, like we've been through the whole Me Too movement, right? And safeguarding is rightly a really important thing. However, the simplistic approach that we tend to take to consent will result in ballet classes where there's things like a no-touch rule. Sounds pretty sensible. Like that way we can keep all of these little girls that are in their little tutus safe from anybody predatory, right? The problem is with that, that oversimplification means that you're developing a kind of culture of distrust, that a culture of fear and shame and harm and hiding things. Nobody is learning to navigate this stuff and to work out who they can trust and who they can't. Nobody's learning to speak up about what's okay with them and what isn't. Nobody's recognizing the individuals in the room, that some people might be totally okay with holding hands and dancing in a circle, and other people just might have a real sensory problem with that. My daughter is, she's not diagnosed autistic, but she has a lot of sensory issues, and like if she doesn't want to be touched, it doesn't have to be the wrong kind of touch. It's just touch when she feels like that. So all of that oversimplification, just like it's a massive missed opportunity, and it creates this kind of culture of keeping a system going where we're just assuming some people are going to be harmful and we've got to keep some other people safe from them. So let's just do this like really overly simplistic sledgehammer approach to try and solve it, and it doesn't really change anything. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was the practice of saying no. Culturally, we are not generally expected to say no, especially if you're socialised as a girl or woman. But people of all genders in Britain especially, we're quite, like it's rude to say no to things. There's a lot of kind of assumptions about that. And in dance culture, historically perhaps, maybe still, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a dancer, I'm in other bits of performing arts. But if you're the dancer that goes, I don't want to do that, I'm not okay with that, are you able to do that? Or are you a little bit afraid that you will get the reputation for being the troublemaker that doesn't get any work now, So I think I would encourage you and invite you to practice saying no in low-risk situations with your friends, with your most trusted people, and just get in the habit of recognising that no can be a complete sentence. You don't have to go, no, because I'm ever so sorry and I'd really like to, but I can't, and I've got to go to my grandma's and I'm on an air. You can just go, no. And it's all right. It's okay. And the other thing I'd invite you to do, especially the male-identified people, but all of you, is to get better at hearing no. It's not rude, actually. It's somebody trusts you enough to be honest with you and say, I'd rather not, actually, then that's great. Thank you for being really clear about that, keeping yourself safe, being honest and open with me, and showing me that you trust me. That's really fucking brilliant. Sorry, I swear. I'm very sweary. Sorry. Okay, so that's saying no. Stop swearing, Jen. Just a quick one about audience as well. I spend a lot of time talking in theatre contexts about trigger warnings. There's like a massive fear in certain marketing departments that the world's gone a bit woke and we've got to put a trigger warning on everything. And oh dear God, the theatre's going to be just be, oh, everybody needs a trigger warning and they all need blinking access and ooh-de-da. Right, look, just chill out, because actually content notes are really helpful for everyone. Isn't it nice to be able to go to an event and know whether there's going to be participation or not beforehand? To know that the reason they've put a 16+ age guidance on it is because exactly what is going to happen. I just recently took my 13-year-old to see a 16+ thing. It was the thing about Ursula the Sea Witch that was on at the Alhambra, like a silly musical about Ursula from the Little Mermaid. And it's a bit raunchy and very queer and highly camp. And there's a little bit of innuendo. But I know my 13-year-old could totally cope with that. Some 13-year-olds would be deeply offended by it. And I had to work quite hard to get that information and make that decision. So making these kinds of content notes and access practices, just really core to how we always behave, just makes it nicer for everyone, just makes it more inclusive for everyone. So I'm on a bit of a mission to tell marketing people in the arts that. And finally, I wanted to say that consent is really very much a thing about liberation. That for me, every time we're brave enough to say, no, that's not okay with me, or hang on a minute, I've got a question, or to show up being unmasked and neurodivergent, or to be that visually impaired person who is there at the theatre going, I want to come in and I don't want to bring my carer, what are you going to do about it? No, I'm not suggesting you do that necessarily, but every time we kind of show up totally as ourselves and challenge what's expected of us and are a bit more irregular and a bit less predictable, we are subtly changing that outer circle of culture, that outer circle of system, and saying, no, that system's not working for me. So it's an invitation to do that in your individual lives, in your interpersonal interactions, in your groups, because that's your sphere of influence. You may not be able to stop what's happening on the other side of the world or run the country or make big decisions about arts funding or whatever. You can only work within your sphere of influence, and your consent, your agency, your ability to make choices is radical. And I hope that you'll seize some entitlement for yourselves and go for it.
Thank you very much. Now, it is time for a break, but if there is anyone who really has an urgent question, I don't want to just leave it. Oh, from online.
There's a question here online from Jennifer Toxvig, who says, my question for Jen is, please can we have lunch? And then she says, we have to make demands of the system until the system is forced to change to accommodate us. Systems should accommodate people, not the other way round.
Hello. I wondered if you had any thoughts or advice or practice on negotiating consent after the fact, after something has happened, which it then becomes apparent you didn't consent to, or somebody didn't, even if maybe they thought at the time they did, particularly in a way that holds space for the person who's done the overstepping of the mark and kind of moving forwards in a way that's collaborative rather than punitive.
Great. It's this accountability thing. Our social justice systems, and most of us, and the way we're socialised, is very much crime and punishment. You're a bad person. You're evil. You made a mistake. You're wrong. Leave. Go to prison. You're not allowed in the group anymore. Pylons on social media, etc. And I really, really, really think that the answer is curiosity and compassion. Obviously, when somebody has been harmed, there's a very important job to do to keep that person safe from the person who has harmed them. But in most situations, it's a misunderstanding. It's this compass gone wrong. People have strayed off somehow. There's been a miscommunication, or they thought they were still in the context where it was okay, but they're not anymore, or they haven't got the right information, or somebody's changed their mind, and it's really hard in that moment. Like we were just describing, I was just describing the boys. Their gran doesn't walk in. They carry on thinking something's all right because nobody's said no yet, and then afterwards go, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you and I'm really sorry. And I think it's very, very hard. I am trained in restorative practices. Restorative justice is a wonderful exploration of that, and there are some quite interesting communities and individuals doing work around it, but it is a huge, huge area that needs work. I want to get this model out there as much as possible instead of the tick box thing, because I think that's the problem, is people people are frightened to say yes or to say no, to get it wrong, to get it, the right wrong thing. But like Sandrine was describing, this boundaried space. No space is safe, but it's as safe as it can be because you've got all of this going on in the room. And the empowerment that gives you when you've experienced in it and been in it for a short period of time, you kind of go out into the world and go, the world's not like this, but you've kind of got it with you. And it's really useful. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jenn.
Hello. Thank you for everything you've said so far. I wanted to ask, when you are working in a group of people, maybe this, for the purpose of this example, let's say it is work you've all turned up for, and you are faced with people's different access needs, and those access needs clash, whether that is due to neurodiversity or disability or just being a human with a preference. How do you maintain productivity in a working environment when you know that not everyone's access needs can be met?
I think there isn't, I haven't got a magic wand, but I think that it does go down to taking time to do the navigation and to enable people to be heard and to hear each other, and to find the place where we're willing to move forward together. And sometimes that might mean somebody needs special treatment and not being in the room with everyone else and doing something different. A great example was, I was talking consent with some people who do arts with people with severe learning difficulties, and they had a group of people who'd made brilliant costumes to be part of a carnival, and they got to the start of the parade, and one person went, I don't want to do it, and they had a whole group of them. Thankfully, they'd thought ahead about this and had enough support workers with them that they could go fine, and that person could be taken and supported and looked after, and the rest of the group could continue without it being a problem because they'd planned ahead for that. If they hadn't planned ahead for that in that situation, you would be in a kind of, right, okay, how do I now keep most people happy in the best way that I can? Is there a way to go, right, we can't do the parade, but we can do our own parade? Or is there a way to find out why that person suddenly doesn't want to do it, and is there anything that could help them to feel safe enough to do it now, but without them feeling the pressure that everybody else, the thin line between cajole and coerce, and it's nuanced and it's difficult, and this is why I keep saying we'll get it wrong. You can't have everyone in enthusiastic consent all the time, but you probably can find a way where you are all willing to move forward together.
Thank you.
Hiya. In terms of the clashing thing, because when you have a team working, you need to be sure that everybody is putting everything out on the table. And earlier in your steps example, you mentioned energy as a way of consent as well, that you could feel the room energetically giving you the consent. But if you are moving forward to a place as a team, do you ever catch yourself feeling energy from someone who you therefore feel like might not have put everything out on the table? And how do you spot that?
I think one of the big bits of this is about trust and the nature of trust and how it grows over time. And I quite like Brené Brown. Not everybody likes her. She told a great story about how her daughter came home from school devastated because she told a friend a secret, and this friend had told all of the rest of the class the secret, and she was mortified and embarrassed. And Brené Brown talked about how the teacher used to throw marbles into a jar every time the whole class did something good. Oh, let's put a few marbles in the jar. And when the jar was full, they'd have a whole class celebration. And this was a kind of building up of trust of the class over time that was very visual and representative. And her daughter then started to sort of, well, not physically, but mentally kind of go, right, I've got marble jar friends. And they're the people that I've built this relationship with. We're up with over time. So I think in the instance you're talking about, it's maybe you've just gone a bit too fast over here and not everybody's kept up with you. And for whatever reason, someone in that group is holding back. They're not ready to share and be honest and open with everyone. And that will require all of the nuance of communication and curiosity and stuff to kind of unpack. But that's where the boundaries come in as well. You know, like if you have all agreed that that's what you're going to do, and you carry on and do it, and someone goes, hang on a minute, I didn't agree to this, you have got well, those are our boundaries. That's how we've all agreed we'll behave in here. I mean, mine would be, for example, around trans inclusion. I run a lot of open groups and things like that, but if I will not have people in my groups who are going to be speaking hate about trans people. I will just go, that's not welcome in this boundaried space. I'm not saying I won't have a conversation with you outside of it about it, but in this boundaried space, no. And so, yeah, it's about the context, the limits and the boundaries and taking them with you or not. They've breached the rules by going, I'm not going to be honest with you. So it's how you handle that.
So you can almost have a boundary of trust
Yeah.
in your group, and therefore, be certain everybody.
And I keep checking in, you know, and is everyone still okay? Is everyone still okay? Are we all okay? Are we still okay? Oh, wait a minute. Let's just check. Okay, and on we go. And that's, you know, that'll usually be how it works, but occasionally you'll have an outlier that's just, not going to be able to fit into that particular space.
Thank you very much. We've run over a little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good because the conversations are really interesting, and it's all about sharing that space together and exchanging. So, yes, really, really lovely. Thank you so much.
Can I say one more thing?
You go.
I would really, really, really like to create, Sandrine and I have talked about this, create a kind of manifesto for consent in the performing arts. If any of you are interested in taking this work forward and talking about how we practice it in your practice, whatever your practice is, and working with us on making some recommendations around this kind of work, I would love to hear from you. My email is jen@irregular.org.uk, and that's probably in the blurb somewhere.
It's all on the Eventbrite and in the QR code if you scan them.